everybody for having me here today. And as Julie said, it is a great timing for this workshop because the situation in both France and the UK, I don't think has ever been quite as hostile for refugees as it is right now. What we're seeing on both sides of the channel really is absolutely shocking. In Calais right now, we actually have a ban on food distribution in many areas of the town, which, you know, if you just think about that, the fact that we are not allowed to distribute food is probably the most hostile act that I have ever seen. We are having extreme evictions all the time. For anybody who's been to Calais in the last few years, I think you wouldn't even recognise it if you went back there now. Most of the places where the refugees used to sleep are now fenced off and there's nowhere for them to stay. There are people who are so frightened of these evictions and bussings out that we are struggling to find them. We have to be very mobile just to get food to people. We're having to do a lot more smaller patrols and small distributions just to find groups of people to give them food. The situation in Calais right now, it is horrible. It's never been good, but it is horrible. And I cannot emphasize enough the fact that we are struggling to give people food, I find absolutely deeply shocking. Our volunteers have been amazing. They've been working really hard. They're doing extra work. We're giving out actually more food than we ever have done before because so many people are struggling to access the government food distributions. But it feels incredibly hostile. It feels incredibly difficult. And it's mirrored by what is happening on the UK side. As you might have seen on the UK side, we have around about 5,000 people now living in hotels and barracks accommodation across the UK. That's come about for a number of factors. It's partly because the Home Office was just so behind with processing people. There were already people waiting up to a year to have their asylum claims processed, but with COVID, that has got even worse. Then there were a number of new arrivals, the people who came across on boats. And then also there was further delays because of the COVID. And all this has come together to mean that there are all these people waiting to be processed, put into hotel accommodation that was talked about being just short term for a few weeks. But now actually we know that these people, a lot of them are going to be in this accommodation for up to a year. So what we've started doing is we're now working in a lot of these hotels. But the things that we're seeing people in the UK that are living almost as badly as people in Calais. They do have a roof over their heads, but they arrive in one set of clothes and that's all they've got. If that's all you've got, you can't take your clothes off to wash them. We're seeing people in the UK without shoes. I mean, that is ridiculous. The Home Office take their phones off them when they arrive. It's unnecessary, and as most of you probably know, a phone is so important to a refugee. But probably the worst thing that we're seeing, the worst thing is this mission that the government is on to deport as many people as possible before Christmas. So all the people in the hotels and the barracks, they know this. A lot of them have seen people turn up at the hotels and take groups of people off to the detention centres, and they know that people are trying to be deported. And they're absolutely terrified. They are terrified. I've seen people who are literally sick with fear, who can't eat because their stomachs are in knots because they're so frightened. I was talking to a man last week who is sleeping on the floor in his friend's bedroom because he's too scared to sleep on his own in his bedroom. Even worse, sometimes we're seeing people running away from the accommodation because they're so frightened of being deported. But that takes them outside of the system and spoils their chances for asylum. So it's really dysfunctional. And to see this level of fear when they've got here and it's supposed to be the place where they're safe, it's absolutely wrong and it's absolutely horrible. And the government now are saying they want to deport 1,000 people by Christmas, 1,000 people. It's wrong and it's horrible and it's wicked. And one of the things that's upset me the most this year is that I think we all knew that up to now, the newspapers were doing a lot to stir up hate. And we were all used to the headlines in the Daily Mail and the Sun about migrants coming here to take our jobs and all the things we saw about migrants. But actually this year, it hasn't been the newspapers, it's been our government. It's been our government who have been the primary ones instigating the hate against the refugees. It's been Boris Johnson driving home the phrase, illegal immigrants, illegal immigrants, illegal immigrants. It's been the Home Office pushing the idea that if they cross a safe country, they're not real refugees. And that's one of the biggest pushbacks we get on social media, that somebody has crossed a safe country isn't a real or genuine refugee. And it's not true, but it is Priti Patel and the Home Office that have pushed that idea. And those two phrases, the thing about a safe country and the thing about illegal immigrants, is what has probably done the most damage to refugees and to our society, how they look at them this year. And those two things have come from our government, from our elected officials, not the newspapers. Our actual officials have done that stirring up of hate. So we need to do something about it. And against that backdrop, we've also got the far right attacking us. We've got the far right going into hotels. We've got the far right demonstrating outside the barracks. We've got the far right making volunteers scared to help people. And we've got the far right making the refugees scared to come out of the hotels. Today, there have been some fantastic demonstrations in both Folkestone and Wales, and that's amazing to see. But the problem is that they're there every single day, only in small numbers, but every day. So what do we need to do? Well, for every time the far right do a demonstration, for all the horrible stuff that they put on social media, for all the times that they shout, what that does is make a presence. And we need to combat that with our presence. We need to make our presence seen and heard. We need to make people feel and know that there are people in the UK who care about refugees. And every single thing that we do to help them, it doesn't just help them, it shows our presence. So every time that we as volunteers collect or donate or go to the hotels or get stories in the newspapers or share the refugee stories on social media, everything that we do makes our presence felt. All the campaigns that we run, so this year we'll be running our Coats campaign, we'll be running the Winter Appeal that Julie mentioned, everything that we do, all that activity, anything that activates people, anything that people do to help refugees, that balances out what the far right does. That shows that people care. And to me, that is really important. It's as important as giving them the stuff. It's showing that we care about them, and it's showing that there's people on our side. So I'm very grateful to you all for listening, but let's do it this year. Let's show how many of us are active and caring, and let's activate as many people as possible. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire, for that fantastic, and at times quite harrowing and angering, introduction to the meeting. But it was a really fantastic way to kick us off to look at what we can be doing and look at what people are already doing over the issue. Our next speaker, I'm also delighted to introduce, is Brendan Woodhouse, who's a firefighter and member of the FBU Firefighters Union, and also has been an activist with the Seawatch campaign, who have played a fantastic and, I imagine, extremely difficult role in fighting to save people and go out and provide support for those in that dire situation. So without further ado, I will hand over to Brendan now. Thanks, Brendan.
Hi, thank you, and Claire, that was wonderful, heartbreaking stuff to hear. As I've been introduced by Julie, my name is Brendan Woodhouse, FBU member. Been working the last 5 years in search and rescue for refugees, mainly in the central Mediterranean, but also off the coast of Lesvos, mainly with an organisation called Seawatch, but I've worked with others too. I've witnessed, experienced, and been part of some of the most horrendous suffering that you can imagine. I've seen, I don't know how many people drown, and I've done CPR on kids, and been successful, and I've failed as well. And what I wanted to talk about was the new wave of criminalisation and intimidation that the NGOs are facing at the moment, where ships are being detained, airplanes are being grounded, and activists are being intimidated. The UK is involved in this as well, but the EU is doing all that it can to prevent the NGOs from saving lives and from documenting human rights violations. The authorities have decided to let people drown on our doorsteps. We are digging our moats even deeper and building our walls even higher with each of the actions that goes against the civil fleet, and groups like Care for Calais as well. But each person we help means that we take one of those bricks off that wall and build a bridge. The people that we are helping at sea are in a bad way, and also in the camps as well. It's no different. They are physically and psychologically scarred. Many have been returned again and again to Libya, and they have been delivered into the hands of criminal gangs on our behalf. With our taxpayers' money, we are funding the Libyan Coast Guard, if I could call them a Coast Guard. They're nothing of the such. They are a gang of criminals who catch people and return them and then sell them to be tortured, to be chained by the hands and tortured in telephone calls to their parents. The abuses that they suffer in these phone calls are astonishing. And I could tell you about some of those, but I'd be running out of time if I started. Over the course of the last 3 months, each of the 5 search and rescue NGO ships that are trying to operate have been blocked. Every single one of them. Currently, there are no ships in the search and rescue zone that are available to rescue. Each time a ship returns to port, it is inspected and tied in red tape. And it's important to realise that no other ships receive such scrutiny. But it's not only our ships, it's our planes. The Moonbird is a humanitarian spotting plane. It's been grounded for the last 2 months. And you have to ask yourself, what are they trying to stop the planes from witnessing? They're trying to blind us to the inaction of state agencies and to the humanitarian disasters that are on our borders. Last month, the planes spotted 45 people out at sea on a rubber boat, reported them to the Maltese authorities. It was approaching Maltese waters. They were ignored. Those 45 people drowned. I know it's hard for some people to believe that our governments are doing what they can to perpetuate the deaths in the seas, but that's what's actually happening. If you look at what's happened over the last 5 years, 5 years ago, we had Operation Mare Nostrum, where there were dozens of military ships deployed at different times. There was always a military ship in that sea, and it is the most militarized sea in the planet. But they pulled all those boats away. And right now, for the last year or so, not a single military ship has saved a single refugee. They've criminalized the NGOs. We all seen that on the news, I'm sure. You've seen how each of the NGOs has been criminalized. The Juventa was a crew, the Juventa 10 of a crew from the ship Juventa from an organisation called Jürgen Rettet, who have been investigated since the middle of 2017. The investigations are still ongoing. They have no intention to actually prosecute. They're just trying to tie us in red tape. Even the cargo ships that go to rescue people, the Maersk Etienne last month rescued people and they were punished. How were they punished? They were kept at sea, denying them the right to take the people to a safe port of entry, putting them at great risk, putting the people that are at risk at sea in even worse conditions. And by doing that, they are deterring the other cargo ships from rescuing people at sea. And that's despite the knowledge of what happens to those returned. Legitimate maritime procedures are being abused and manipulated by the authorities. Inspectors of NGO vessels are becoming a way to block search and rescue efforts. From Morea to the Mediterranean Sea, from Lesvos to Manchester, the EU approach to migration has been to systematically trap, punish, and abandon people, whether they're leaving them to die at sea or holding thousands of men, women, and children in appalling conditions on Greek islands, in places like France, where the people are routinely chased and abused by the police. Europe's policy of frightening people from seeking sanctuary must be opposed. And that draws an end to what I wanted to say. And I just wanted to thank you all for listening as well. And thank you all for coming in and caring so much.
Thanks, Brendan, for such an incredibly moving and kind of urgent speech. I'm sure you could have said so much more as well. And I will let people know that we will have time for speakers to come back to briefly address things at the end of the meeting as well that come out of the discussion, but such an important contribution. Our next speaker is all the way from Greece, has joined us, Argyri Erotokritou, I hope that I've got your name right there, who's from the Greek Doctors Union, and I believe has been involved in solidarity work with the refugee movement in Greece. I mean, of course, people will have seen in the last week the incredible victory of the anti-racist and anti-fascist movement in Greece against the fascist Golden Dawn, who have tried to, who have committed acts of murder, who have tried to terrorise and scapegoat. And it was such a fantastic example to see them defeated in such a way. Hopefully, yeah, Argyri can tell us about, you know, what it's been like to be involved in that campaign in solidarity with refugees. So I'll hand over to you. Thanks.
Hello, greetings and solidarity from Athens. Thank you so much for your invitation. After the historic victory against the neo-Nazis of Golden Dawn, I think anti-fascist and anti-racist movement have grown much stronger. Over the past years, racist policies of the Greek governments and the European Union have turned Greek islands into prisons for migrants and refugees. They had built fences to the borders of Evros and organized illegal pushbacks to the Turkish borders. They organized evictions, leaving hundreds of homeless of migrants and refugees. We're pretty sure that these policies are responsible for drownings, deaths, and the shameful pictures we all see in Karatepe now and Morea earlier in Lesvos. The same policies actually worked as a greenhouse for the far right and fascist groups. That's why we believe that it is essential to fight together against the fascist threat and racism at the same time. KERFA, a united front here in Greece, a sister organization of Stand Up to Racism, organizes today demonstrations all across the country outside the refugee camps. A few weeks earlier, demonstrations took to the streets after the fire in Morea. And again, on the 26th of June, we organized mass demonstrations with the slogan, Black Lives Matter, Refugee Lives Matter. And that was a fantastic demonstration in the streets of Athens and all across the country. But I think that one of the most important characteristics of these demonstrations is a presence of the presence and the support of workers' union, a union that I come from. And I want to give you an example. In Lesvos, the local union of private sector was at the front line of the demonstration after the fire in Morea camp. And they demanded to open the borders, open the cities and transfer refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers to the mainland. One of the demands was as well to transfer them in safe facilities, in hotels and apartments, to open our schools and hospitals for them, to ensure that their health is safe, especially now during the pandemic. You know, the fact that health workers and teacher unions support the anti-racist movement means that the anti-racist movement is much, much stronger, not just in numbers, but when we are facing that immigrants or refugees come to our hospitals, the fact that we have organized all these actions in the past means that doctors and nurses say that that we can accept the refugees, whether they have their papers, whether they don't have their papers, and to hospitalize them. I think that's the best answer, especially now that we have the right-wing government of New Democracy and wants to organize local lockdowns because of COVID-19, instead of providing them water, healthcare, mass testing for COVID, warm houses. To stop spread the coronavirus, government turns the camps into prisons. The other thing that I wanted to tell is that the European movement against racism is very important for us here. The fact that everyone demands from their government to open their borders to accept refugees. It strengthens our struggle here against our government and against the far right. We organize here in a direction to stop the scapegoating of refugees and stop the division inside the working class. After the 7th of October and that victory, I think that thousands of workers, of students understand that when we fight together, we can win. We can win all this racism, we can win the fascist threat. So solidarity again. I'm very delighted to take part in this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Argyri. That was brilliant to hear from you. And yeah, we're all in solidarity with all the struggles that are going on in Greece right now as well. And I think everybody will be, you know, there's a lot of comments going on in the thread as all the speakers are addressing the meeting that people can follow. It's fantastic to see so much support for what everybody's doing. Just before I introduce our next speaker, I'll just read some of the questions that have been put in the Q&A that people can consider while they're speaking. Candy has asked, the public need educating to the root cause of why refugees flee their home countries. How can we change this rhetoric? Carol has asked, please ask Brendan what his union are doing to bring this situation with the rescue boats and planes being grounded and locked into red tape to be released to do its designated work, and what can people do to bring this to the public's attention? Yes, so people can consider those things. The next speaker that I'll introduce is a brilliant activist in Stand Up to Racism. I was very proud to work alongside him recently when we organised a massive show, socially distanced and very, very well organised, of 1,500 people on the streets of Glasgow in the wake of the far right or certain racist groups trying to exploit the situation and attack the refugee demo. We had a fantastic response to that. And Mohammad Asif, who is from the Afghan Human Rights Foundation, was, you know, is an amazing, very tireless activist who's been involved in a whole number of campaigns. So I will, without further ado, introduce Mohammad to address the meeting.
Thank you very much, Jolie. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's always a pleasure to work with you and with so many other colleagues. Greetings from myself and my family. I think it's a very, very important day, you know, that today, although, you know, we are not physically there, but, you know, we are here anyway fighting the racists and the fascists. I came to Glasgow about 21 years ago, nearly 21 years ago, as an asylum seeker from Afghanistan. And today is the most difficult days or the most difficult time for asylum seekers and refugees. I will talk about Scotland only, and my colleagues, the previous speakers, all of them explained very well. Since we arrive in Scotland, you know, refugees are treated just like numbers or the sheep and goats, and not respected the way that human beings should be respected. Let me give you a few examples. In the past 6 months or 7 months, 3 asylum seekers died in the city of Glasgow. You know, Glasgow has become the capital of death for asylum seekers. 3 asylum seekers died within 6 or 7 months. And we do not know why these asylum seekers died in their rooms or in their hotels or their accommodation, except one asylum seeker who was shot dead by the police. And that particular asylum seeker, he was also the victims of the Tory or the British bias and racist policies towards asylum seekers. Because when that asylum seeker was shot by the police recently, one night before, his colleague who phoned the accommodation providers, Mears, that this particular asylum seeker was suffering from mental health issues, and he is going to probably, you know, take the law into his own hands because he did not know what to do. He was suffering from mental health issues. The other 2 asylum seekers in Glasgow, until today, we demanded, with the help of Stand Up to Racism and many other organizations, we asked the Home Office that they should tell us that why these 2 asylum seekers, in particular one woman who died in her flat where her 1-year-old, you know, child was just staying there next to her dead body for, you know, for maybe 2 or 3 days. And until today, the Home Office have not told us. You know, when I always disagree with my colleagues when they say the Home Office system is broken, it is not actually broken. It is designed in such way you know, that so they can degrade asylum seekers, they can humiliate asylum seekers, and they can insult asylum seekers. They designed the asylum system for asylum seekers who come to Britain or Scotland or other parts of Britain, so they can be humiliated and they can be degraded and they can be insulted. You know, 21 years ago, you know, this coronavirus, one thing about coronavirus was very good, positive, that people come together, you know, the ordinary citizens of this country, whether they were in England or Scotland or Wales, in Northern Ireland, the racist movements and the people who really saw the poverty, who saw the poverty and who went out there. You know, imagine, I'm always saying this, I saw the queues, you know, when people were buying things in bulks and they were storing them in their garages and their houses, but asylum seekers have no money. They couldn't buy any food or any essentials. So there was hardly any food for asylum seekers to buy and store it in their houses. And that's the reason, because 21 years ago, we were given £36.50 a week. 21 years later, asylum seekers get £37.70 a week. So there is hardly any increasement, just by £1 only. And look at the inflation, look at the you know, things went probably triple or 4 times or 5 times, you know, more expensive. So I have never seen such poverty in my entire life. I have been to Lesvos, you know, I have worked in Morea camp as a volunteer, went with a charity. I went to Clare many times, about 3 or 4 times, with different colleagues. And one time I accompanied Stand Up to Racism, and we worked there. But when I saw the poverty during coronavirus, and it's still there, you know, it was unbelievable. You know, you cannot believe. It was not only asylum seekers, it was the local people as well, you know, who hardly had any people, any money. You know, the local people who, you know, who were pensioner and who had no money, you know, who lost their jobs. But then, you know, there was hardly anything for them. And remember, now, I think the racists also realized that why asylum seekers come to Britain. I saw people literally running after the pasta, fighting over pasta, fighting after, you know, toilet paper or tissue paper. So now imagine when your home is bombed, when your country is bombed, and you have nowhere to go. So now you know why asylum seekers come to Britain, because they're literally running from bombs. Where during coronavirus, you know, God forbid, there was no bombs, there was nothing, but there was poverty. You know, people had hardly anything, which people lost everything. Suddenly, everything was closed. Suddenly, the supermarkets were empty. So, but this is happening on the daily basis to asylum seekers. Maybe this happened after 100 years or 80 years, I don't know how many years ago, but this is happening to asylum seekers every day. But look at the government, the Tory government, the racist government, when they propose many, many policies or secret meetings, you know, which were leaked. They want to send asylum seekers to Ireland, you know, to lock them on the ships, to send them somewhere far away. They even have a proposal to send them somewhere in Scotland. What luckily the Scottish government said, no, we're not going to listen to you. But then 3 days ago or 4 days ago, the Home Office came with a new proposal. They're going to net the sea, or the English Channel. You know, so when the dinghies come, so the dinghies will be stuck into, you know, the nets that the Home Office have, you know, put into the sea or the English Channel. And then you have the far right or the fascists or the racists. When they were running after asylum seekers in their hotels, they were videoing them and telling them they look this at the expense of our taxpayers. The same taxpayers' money, you know, when every one of us, you, me, everyone was saying that the war in Iraq was illegal. But the same taxpayers' money were spent in Iraq on an illegal war, which killed 1 million people and displaced many, many millions others. But if the British government want to have less asylum seekers, British should stop bombing other countries. British have bombed Afghanistan for the past 20 years. They have destroyed Iraq totally with the help of America and others. Syria, Libya, you know, the same is in Lebanon, in Sudan, in Eritrea, and many, many other parts of the world. And British is an active player, you know, producing more and more asylum seekers. And that's why asylum seekers come to Britain. You know, when we compare asylum seekers, you know, it's a tiny amount of asylum seekers come to Britain. Many settle in poor countries like Pakistan, Iran, Lebanon, Jordan, you know, Iraq, which is, you know, torn by war, 2 or 3 million asylum seekers. You know, there are many, many things I would like to say, but I think there is no time. So I rather stop, otherwise Julie will shut me up. So thank you very much. Thank you for the good work, and thank you for the speakers and all those who are attending today. It's a wonderful job, wonderful work. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed, and I'm so sorry to all our speakers. I'm sure that we would love to hear people expand much more on the really important issues that people are bringing in, but we do want to get to the discussion. I would just remind people, because I think in the chat thread there's an option where you can send it to all panelists, or which is just the speakers and the tech team, or you can send to all panelists and all attendees. So I think some of the tech team have pointed out that people might be sending it just to the panelists, which means that that's great, all the panelists can see what your thoughts are, but you might want to select to send it to the attendees so that there can be more chat between people in the whole meeting overall. I'm not sure actually if people can see when you're in the attendee slot, but we've got over 90 people in this session, which is fantastic. And I would say that when our bookings closed today for the workshops at 1 o'clock, we had around 2,000 people had registered for the conference. So there are 7 different workshops going on right now, which has been quite a technical challenge for us to pull off this year. We'd normally be doing this in a hall in London. But so that's fantastic, really, that all these sessions are going on at the same time, that there's so many people taking part in the discussions, and that, you know, just to encourage people, yeah, to use the chat and make sure you click to send to all attendees. So I'll now bring in our final panel speaker before opening to the discussion, which is Daniella Abraham, who's from the Cinti Roma Holocaust Memorial Trust. And we're, you know, obviously the scapegoating and discrimination of Roma communities has been a very big feature of what we've seen with the hostile environment in Britain. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce Daniella to address the panel. Thanks, Daniella.
So hi. Hello, Julie. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Daniella Abraham, and I'm the founder of the Cinti and Roma Holocaust Memorial Trust in UK. Our organization is dedicated to researching and commemorating the Roma and Cinti Holocaust, as we call it, Samordaripen, and the ongoing problems of anti-Roma racism that still exists today across most of Europe. Finally, we have a role as a community support and advocacy group. There are more now than 300,000 Roma in Britain who have immigrated from all over Europe, from Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Romania, Yugoslavia. I'm originally from Slovakia, and we come from these ex-communist countries because we have been escaping from the deep anti-Roma racism in these countries, and we have come to UK to try to make a better life for our children and our families. We only asking to be allowed to live peacefully and raise our children in society that does not victimize us just for who we are. Even we are the largest ethnic minority group in Europe with our own language, which calls Romanes, and traditions, of course, we have, and our ancestors with them. Basically, we came originally from centuries ago from India. We remain marginalized and discriminated and misunderstood. And we are not asking for any sort of like special treatment. We ask only to be treated equally. Across most of Europe, East and West alike, Roma and the Cinti denied to live in non-Roma areas and forced to live in slums which have no water, sanitation, or electricity. We are often prevented from accessing healthcare, which results in Roma on average dying 15 years younger than non-Roma people. Of course, our children are denied proper education, commonly being false labeled like we are like mentally handicapped, and simply just because of our color of skin. Furthermore, we regularly experience violent attacks. I myself was attacked many times before I came to UK. It started almost from the childhood, and I was 10 years old when I was walking home from school, and a racist neighbor decided to shoot me on my left chest with a birdshot gun, just because I'm Roma. And day before, he told me that you dirty gypsy, I'm gonna shoot you, you're gonna die. And you know, there is different stories, not just from me. I never met a Roma or a Cinti person who will never experience this kind of hatred and racist abuse. As you know, in Europe, the far-right politicians openly calling for mass deportation of Roma, and some have been called another genocide against us. Some of them are, let's say, in European Parliament sitting, and they are saying, like example, in this case, I can mention from Bulgaria and Slovakia, but from Bulgaria, the map, Mr. Jambaski, he said that our people, the Roma, the only solution for Roma is euthanasia. I think in 21st century, this is totally unacceptable. And I just want to also mention that I feel at the present time is particularly important that the far right once again on the rise across Europe, not only did to the Samordaripen, which we call it the Roma Holocaust, kill around 3/4 of all of the Roma and Cinti in Europe, but its effect continued among the survivors right up to the present day. And many families lost all their possessions as well, as basically they have been thrown into poverty. My family have been affected also by Samordaripen, by the Roma Holocaust. And basically, all I wanted to say that I love my nation. I love my nation, and I really hope that the mistakes committed in the past wouldn't be repeated again, and we can work together to make a better future for our children, not just here in UK, but also in Europe and around the world, because every lives matter. Roma lives matter too. And I just want to say thank you to Julian to stand up to racism, to invite me to this Zoom meeting, and God bless you and your families. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniella. You know, it's upsetting sometimes to hear the experiences that people are subjected to because of the racism that exists and because of the racism that is driven from the top of the establishment, and the hostile environment is a huge intensification of that. But it's also, I think, very heartening to see the solidarity and the fact that we can come together in unity and try and fight back against these, because there is a huge anti-racist mood, as well as the threats that we face.